Welcome, sleepy soul. I'll be your storyteller tonight, guiding you gently toward deep, peaceful rest. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime tales. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, and if there's a story you'd like next, I'd love to hear it.
I hadn't been back to my grandparents' house for Thanksgiving in 3 years, but the place hadn't changed much. Same gravel crunch in the driveway, same crooked porch light that took a second too long to flicker on. Same smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon that spilled out when my grandmother opened the door and pulled me into one of her bone-tight hugs. "Look at you," she said against my hair. "Too thin. City living doesn't feed you right." My grandfather stayed seated in his armchair in the living room, TV humming low with a football game. He just raised his hand and gave me a little wave, the way he always did, like we'd just seen each other yesterday. It should have felt comforting. Didn't. There was a stiffness in the air I didn't remember from my childhood visits. Conversations sounded rehearsed. My aunt laughed a little too loudly at something my dad said. My mom kept smoothing invisible wrinkles out of the table runner. It felt like everyone was trying to keep the mood floating just above something heavy that no one wanted to touch. I stepped into the dining room, shrugging off my coat. That's when I saw it. The long wooden table I'd grown up around was dressed in its usual best white lace cloth, the faded orange runner with stitched pumpkins, the same chipped gravy boat my grandfather swore was an antique. Places were set along both sides, name cards written in my grandmother's looping script. Mom, Dad, Aunt Linda, Uncle Rob, Grandpa, Grandma. Kids clustered at the far end. And then, at the very end of the table, closest to the hallway, there was an extra chair. The chair itself was different from the others. Darker wood, taller back, the kind of thing you'd pull from a forgotten corner just to have enough seating. But it was set perfectly. Plate, polished silverware, folded napkin, crystal glass. In front of it, a small white place card with a single word written in neat black ink. Guest. No name, no explanation, just guest. "Who's that for?" I asked, because no one else seemed interested in the fact that someone invisible was apparently joining us. My mom glanced up from straightening forks. For a second, her eyes flickered to the end of the table, then back to me. "What's what, honey?" "The extra setting," I said. "The one that says guest. Are we expecting someone?" Her smile was thin and fast. "Oh, you know your grandmother. She likes things balanced. Odd numbers bother her." That was a lie. My grandmother hated extra work. When we were kids, if someone canceled last minute, she would physically remove the plate before they walked through the door. I looked at my grandmother. She was fussing with the turkey. Back to me, shoulders hunched just slightly higher than normal. "Grandma? Who's the guest?" "Don't be nosy, Nora," she said without turning around. Her voice was gentle, but it landed like a warning. "Go help your cousin with the juice." I let it go. For the moment, by the time everyone sat down, the house was warm. The windows fogged slightly at the corners. The chandelier above the table was draped with garlands of faux autumn leaves. My grandfather led a quick, mumbled grace, his usual half-hearted nod to religion, and we all murmured amen like we always did. The candles in the center of the table were new. 5 of them, tall and thin, burning with nervous little flames. "I'm thankful we're all together," my mom said when it was her turn to say something before we ate. It was a tradition, going around the table sharing what we were grateful for. I'd always loved it as a kid. Tonight, it made my skin itch. As soon as my mom said the word thankful, I felt it. A draft, subtle but sharp, like a cold fingertip tracing the back of my neck. The flames of all 5 candles fluttered at once. Hard, a violent dance like someone had blown across them, though no one had. The light shivered over faces and silverware, stretched shadows across that empty chair at the end of the table. I tried to tell myself it was just air from the heating system kicking on. Old houses breathed in weird ways, but the ducts hadn't made a sound. When it came to my turn, I kept it short. "I'm thankful I could be here this year." The words tasted awkward in my mouth. Again, that same sharp chill ran across my skin. The candle flames bent low, then straightened, as if something had moved between them and me. No one said anything. No, whoa. Did you see that? Not even a nervous laugh. It was like no one else had noticed. Except when I looked up, my grandfather was staring straight at me, his expression unreadable. Then he dropped his gaze to his plate and started carving a piece of turkey. Dinner went on. The normal sounds should have been comforting. The clink of forks, little cousins arguing over rolls, chairs scraping on wood. But underneath it all, I kept hearing something else. A whisper of fabric, the faint groan of weight shifting. I realized after a few minutes that it always came from the same spot. The empty chair. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept pulling back to it. First, it was just wrong. The way the chair sat there like it was part of the family, just as carefully prepared as everyone else's place. The napkin folded like a little triangle of obedience. The untouched fork and knife catching glints of candlelight. Then I started seeing it. Not a full figure, not at first. Just a subtle distortion, a slight darkening of the space above the cushion, like heat waves rising off asphalt. The air above the plate looked thicker somehow, edges fuzzed, while the rest of the room remained clear. I blinked hard, telling myself it was my imagination. The warm room, too much focus on one spot. But every time someone said, thankful, or grateful, or blessed, that faint smear of darkness seemed to condense a little more. My younger cousin Lily, sitting across from me, leaned forward when the adults were distracted by a story about Uncle Rob's new job. "Can you see him too?" she whispered. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "See who?" She flicked her eyes toward the end of the table. "The man in the chair." A cold weight settled in my chest. I swallowed hard. "What does he look like?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She shrugged, expression uneasy. "He's blurry, but he keeps looking at you." The air felt suddenly too thin. I forced myself to keep eating, to nod along to whatever conversation was bouncing around. But my senses were stretched toward that chair, toward the impression of a shape that shouldn't be there. As the evening went on, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, piece by piece. At first, I just noticed goosebumps on my arms. Then I saw my breath when I laughed at something my aunt said, a tiny puff of white that vanished before anyone else could see it. The candles burned lower. Their flames shivered more often now, reacting not just to words of gratitude, but to certain names. When someone mentioned my grandfather's brother, who died long before I was born, the lights guttered so fiercely I thought they'd go out. Around 10, people started drifting toward the living room, making vague noises about coffee and pie. I stayed in my chair, feeling pinned. The empty place at the end of the table seemed heavier now, the distortion more defined. Still no features, but the outline was clearer. Shoulders, a head bowed slightly forward, like someone listening intently. "Nora," my grandmother said from the doorway, "help me carry the dessert?" I stood up too quickly, my chair legs scraping the floor. The sound echoed around the room like a scream. I forced myself not to look directly at the guest chair as I passed it. Still, my eyes flicked sideways. Just for a second. The chair was no longer empty. There was a weight in it, not fully visible, not fully anything. A suggestion of a man, more darkness than form. But I saw the way the seat cushion dipped, the slight indentation where a hand might rest on the edge of the table. Right where my plate had been years ago when I still needed a booster seat. My body wanted to run. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, every step measured. "Who is he?" I asked as soon as the door swung closed behind us, muffling the sounds from the others. My grandmother didn't pretend not to understand. Her hands shook slightly as she cut into the pumpkin pie. "Some guests," she said quietly, "are easier to feed than to refuse." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." She slid the knife under a slice, voice low. "Take this to your grandfather, and don't ask again." "I saw him," I said. "Lily sees him too." She paused, just for a heartbeat. Then she exhaled, the sound thin and tired. "Children always see him first," she whispered. "Then the ones who come back after they've been gone a while." I didn't know what to say to that. The night stretched on. By the time the clock in the hallway chimed 11, some relatives had left, coats wrapped tightly around them as they stepped into the cold. The house grew quieter, the laughter more subdued. My grandfather poured himself a small glass of whiskey, something he never did in front of the family. By midnight, it was just immediate family left. My parents were loading dishes. My aunt and uncle were putting the last of the leftovers into containers. The cousins had been herded upstairs for bed. I was in the dining room again, gathering stray napkins. The candles had nearly burned down, wax puddling onto the runner. The house had a different quality now, less festive, more hollow. The shadows didn't retreat when I looked directly at them. That was when I heard it. A slow, deliberate scrape. I froze. At the end of the table, the guest chair was moving. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to drag its back legs along the wood floor with a sound that made my teeth hurt. It pulled away from the table, as if someone invisible had pushed it back to stand up. No one else was in the doorway yet. The kitchen clatter went on, oblivious. The air around the chair pressed inward, sucking warmth and sound out of the room. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could hear my own breath trembling. Then, clear as anything, I heard footsteps. Soft, bare feet on wood, starting where the chair had been, moving past me. I felt them more than heard them, little drops in the temperature where each step landed. They crossed the dining room, went into the hall, toward the attic stairs. I turned just in time to see the attic door at the end of the hallway shutter, then slowly swing open with a creak that seemed to go on forever. The darkness beyond it was complete, swallowing the edges of the doorway. "Mom!" I called, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. By the time my parents stepped into the hall, the attic door was closed again. The house was still. "What is it?" my dad asked, wiping his hands on a towel. I stared at the door, at the space where the footsteps had gone. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" My mom glanced at the attic, frowning. "The house settles, honey. You know that." No one believed me, or they didn't want to. Either way, no one went to check the attic that night. I barely slept. Every creak, every sigh of the old house felt like something walking just beyond my line of sight. When I did drift off, I dreamed of an invisible man sitting at our table year after year, growing clearer every time someone said they were thankful. In the morning, the house smelled like coffee and reheated ham. Sunlight made the hallway look less sinister. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all, that my mind had taken a strange tradition and twisted it into a story. Then I walked into the dining room. The extra chair was gone, not just pushed back against the wall or tucked into a corner. Gone, as if it had never been there. No place setting, no guest card. The table was half cleared, crumbs and empty glasses scattered around. But the floor told a different story. From the spot where the chair had been, a faint trail of dusty footprints led across the room. Bare feet, adult-sized. The prints were oddly distinct in some places and barely there in others, like whoever left them kept fading in and out with each step. They moved into the hallway, stopped in front of the attic door, turned, and then, impossibly, they continued not up the stairs, but from the attic door back toward the dining room, weaving between chairs, circling the end of the table, as if someone had paced there for hours while we all slept. I followed them until they simply vanished in the middle of the floor, like the person had stepped out of existence. Everyone pretended not to see them. My aunt stepped around a footprint without looking down. My grandfather's eyes slid over the trail and away. My grandmother wiped the same clean spot on the counter 3 times, hands shaking just enough for me to notice. I was the only one who said it out loud. "Who was the guest you were feeding?" Silence fell like a blanket. My family froze, not dramatically, not like in the movies, but in tiny ways. A fork paused halfway to my dad's mouth. My mom's coffee cup hovered just shy of her lips. My grandfather was the one who answered, his voice tired, raspy. "Someone our family owes a meal," he said, "and a place, and our thanks." My skin crawled. "For what?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something like fear. "For making sure," he said slowly, "that the chair never has a name card with one of ours on it." I stared at him, at the place where the chair had been, at the faint, fading footprints that had walked the house while we slept. And in that moment, a thought came uninvited, cold and clear. This year, the card had just said guest. But next year, it didn't have to. I've always been the turkey guy. You know how some families have that one person who does the mashed potatoes or the pies every year? In mine, I was the one who nailed the bird. It started as a joke the first Thanksgiving after my mom died. Dad bought a frozen turkey, forgot to thaw it, and then panicked. I watched him pacing around the kitchen, sweating, swearing under his breath, while my little sister sat at the table trying not to cry. I was 22, knew nothing about cooking except what YouTube taught me. I took over, followed a video, and somehow turned that rock-hard turkey into something edible. People praised it like I'd raised it personally. From that year on, it became my job. So when I tell you that the turkey wouldn't cook this year, I don't mean I messed up the timing. I mean it wouldn't cook. It was Thanksgiving number 8 as Turkey Sam. Same oven, same house I grew up in, same dented roasting pan my mom used. Dad had gone to pick up my aunt and uncle. My sister was setting the table, and I was in the kitchen with a bird that felt wrong in my hands from the moment I unwrapped it. It was half-thawed, heavy, slick with that pale slime raw poultry always has. But when I touched it, it felt colder than it should. Not just chilled from the fridge cold. It bit into my skin like dry ice. Sharp, needling, sinking right into the bones of my fingers. I pulled back, flexing my hands. Damn, this thing is frozen solid, I muttered. I checked the packaging. It had been in the fridge for 2 days, just like always. It should have been soft enough to prep. Instead, the cavity felt like an empty freezer. I could see my breath when I leaned close, a faint puff of white misting over its skin. The kitchen itself wasn't that cold. The ceiling light hummed. The old clock ticked over the stove. Outside, late November gray pressed against the windows, rain whispering against the glass. The oven preheated with a familiar low roar, that dry, toasty smell filling the room. I told myself I was tired, overthinking. Grief always hits weird around the holidays. It stretches your nerves thin until ordinary things feel wrong. I rubbed my hands together, forced myself to keep going. Herb butter under the skin, lemon and onion in the cavity, salt, pepper, garlic. Comforting, mechanical motions I could almost do blind. Still, every time my fingers slid inside the bird, that impossible cold crawled up my arms like something alive. Sam! My sister Lily poked her head in. Dad just texted. They'll be here in 20. Need help? I'm good, I said, forcing a smile. Just wrestling the ice demon turkey. She laughed, rolled her eyes, and went back to arranging the good plates. I eased the turkey into the roasting pan. The metal was room temperature, but the instant the bird touched it, a sheen of frost bloomed underneath, a thin white outline where skin met steel. I blinked and it was gone like I'd imagined it. I slid the pan into the oven, the blast of heat hitting my face, comforting and normal. The thermometer on the front climbed steadily, 325 degrees Fahrenheit. I closed the door, set the timer, and pretended the knot in my stomach was just nerves. For the first hour, everything looked fine. The oven window fogged slightly. The kitchen grew warm, then uncomfortably hot. I basted once, spooning pan juices over pale skin. The liquid that dripped back into the pan steamed, hissing against hot metal. But when I stuck the meat thermometer into the thick part of the thigh, the little digital screen flashed 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I frowned, pulled it out, waited, and jabbed again. 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That was colder. Piece of junk, I muttered. I cleaned the thermometer, ran the probe under hot water, and tested it on my own palm. The numbers jumped to 89 degrees Fahrenheit, then held steady. The turkey was still almost as cold as a refrigerator. By hour 2, the house smelled like nothing. Usually by then, the air would be thick with roasting meat and butter and thyme, that heavy holiday smell that sinks into your clothes. This year, the only scent was a faint metallic tang from the oven itself, like heated iron and dust. I opened the door again. Heat poured out, prickling my cheeks. The turkey sat there, pale and rubbery, a faint shimmer of cold air clinging to it like a mirage. The metal rack beneath it vibrated faintly. A soft tremor I felt through the mitt. The thermometer slid in. 31 degrees Fahrenheit. The hair on my arms stood up. My heart started to race in that slow, sick way that has nothing to do with physical effort and everything to do with a thought you don't want to think. I checked the oven dial. I checked the breaker. I checked the stove. 3 burners were red hot, glowing like they were supposed to. I held my hand inside the oven for a second too long and yanked it back with a hiss. It was hot. It was undeniably, painfully hot. And yet that bird might as well have been encased in ice. "Come on," I whispered, more to myself than to the meat. "Not today. Don't do this today." The timer went off with a cheerful beep that felt like mockery. 3 hours in. Still raw. Still cold. That was when the knocking started. At first, I thought it was somebody at the front door. 3 soft taps, evenly spaced. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped into the hall. The porch through the frosted glass was empty. Gray light filtering in. Rain ticking in fine lines against the window. The knocks came again. But this time they were closer. Not from the door. From the kitchen. I turned slowly. The sound was faint but distinct. Knuckles or something like knuckles. Tapping on metal and glass. Tap, tap, tap. Coming from the oven door. My mouth went dry. I stepped back into the kitchen. Every movement deliberate. Like sudden motion might make it worse. The oven door glass was dark, reflecting my own pale face. The rattle came again. Tap, tap, tap. From inside. Not the erratic pops of metal expanding. Not the occasional ticking of cooling elements. This was polite, almost rhythmic, like someone requesting to be let out. "Lily," I called, my voice thin. "You in here?" No answer. I could hear the TV in the living room, the faint murmur of some pregame show. The house was otherwise quiet. I stood in front of the oven, hand hovering over the handle. The heat coming off the door felt wrong now. There was warmth, yeah, but underneath it something threaded through. A vein of cold like a draft you feel under a closed window. Tap, tap, tap. Faster now. "Okay," I whispered. "This is stupid. It's just expansion. This is normal. It's fine." The knocks shifted, from soft to insistent. Tap, 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 tap. The glass vibrated. The metal frame hummed. It sounded like fingers drumming from the inside. Losing patience. I yanked the plug from the wall. The oven's hum died instantly. The fan stuttered to a stop. The kitchen light flickered once as the power load shifted. The knocking didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. Something rattled against the inside of the oven door, making the glass flex minutely. The sound crawled up my spine. Dull impacts spaced just unevenly enough to feel wrong. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Like whoever or whatever was in there had started to panic. I backed up until my hips hit the counter. My legs felt watery, hands shaking so hard the thermometer rattled against the cutting board. "Sam!" My sister's voice floated from the hall. "Everything okay? Don't come in here," I said. A little too fast, a little too loud. The knocking surged, turning frantic, angry. It wasn't polite anymore. It was pounding. The whole oven rocked slightly, metal squealing as if something inside was trying to kick its way out. The tray clanged against the rack, the sound wild and metallic. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe some stupid sense of responsibility. Maybe just shock. All I know is that I stayed where I was, staring as the oven door handle shuddered, as faint white frost spiderwebbed across the inside of the glass. The kitchen temperature plummeted. One breath, I was sweating. The next, I could see my breath plume in front of me, thick and white. Frost crept along the edges of the countertops, glistening on the faucet, turning condensation on the window into jagged patterns. The overhead light dimmed, then flared, then went out. All at once, the house groaned around me as the power died. From the living room, my sister yelled something, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of sudden, unnatural wind. It was coming from the oven. The door burst open with a shriek of metal. slamming down so hard the entire unit tipped an inch on its feet. A blast of air hit me, a gust so cold it felt like a physical blow. It ripped the breath from my lungs, stung my eyes, froze sweat instantly on my skin. Every candle in the house, the little scented ones my aunt lit earlier, the 3 on the mantel, the tea lights on the dining table, snuffed out in the same instant. The house plunged into a darkness so complete it felt thick, pressing close. The only light came from the open oven. But it wasn't fire. Inside, instead of the expected orange glow, a deep, smothered gray pulsed, like the dim heart of a storm cloud trapped in a box. The turkey sat in the center of the tray, still raw, still impossibly pale, and something was wrapped around it. Not quite shadow, not quite smoke. It had weight, the way it clung to the contours of the bird, pooling in the cavity, curling around the legs. As I stared, it pulled itself tighter, rising, folding in on itself until the shape was almost humanoid. Crouched, head bowed, arms braced on either side of the roasting pan. Couldn't see a face. Where it should have been, there was only a deeper darkness that hurt to look at, like the absence of everything. But I knew, on a level deeper than thought, that it was looking back at me. My skin prickled in tiny, burning points, as if the cold were needling me from every direction. My teeth chattered against each other, jaw locked so tight it hurt. "Sam!" Lily's voice, closer now, thin and frightened. "Why is it so cold? Stay out," I rasped, though my throat felt like it had been scraped with ice. My words puffed in front of my face and drifted toward the open oven, pulled into that gray pulse like smoke into a vent. The thing in the oven shifted. It didn't move like a person. It unfolded, joints bending too smoothly, too silently. The turkey slid with it, attached somehow, like the meat and the darkness were part of the same thing. As it rose, I heard it for the first time. Not a voice. Not exactly. A sound like fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of a metal pipe. A low scrape that vibrated in my molars and made my eyes water. The roasting pan shrieked against the rack as it scraped forward. 1 inch. 2. The entire oven shook, but the thing's outline remained weirdly crisp, more defined with every pulse of gray light. I did the only thing my frozen brain could come up with. I slammed the door. The impact rattled the dishes in the cabinet. Glass somewhere behind me cracked in a high, thin note. The cold wind cut off instantly. Not gone, but contained, pressing against the closed door so hard the metal bowed outward. Under my hands, something hit the inside of the door. Once, twice, again. Each blow sent a dull ache up my arms. "Stay." I heard myself whisper, voice shaking. "Stay in there. Stay in there. Stay in there." The pounding went on for a full 30 seconds, each hit weaker than the last. The frost on the glass thickened, then began to crack, tiny fissures spidering through the whiteness. The overhead light flickered desperately, then blinked back to life, dim but steady. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. No more knocking, no more wind. The kitchen was quiet, except for my ragged breathing and the distant murmur of confused voices from the living room. The temperature crawled slowly back up from Arctic to merely cold. My hands were still on the oven door handle, knuckles white, fingers numb. When I finally let go, they left behind faint condensation, as if the metal were a window on a winter morning. I don't know how long I stood there before I worked up the courage to open it again. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. In my memory, it stretches out forever, this long, tight thread of silence. When I finally pulled the door open, careful and slow, the oven was dark and inert. No pulsing gray, no wind, just the faint smell of overheated metal and something else underneath. A hint of decay, like meat left too long in the sun. The turkey was gone. The roasting pan was still there, but empty. No juices, no herbs, nothing. Just 3 long, parallel scratches running from the back of the pan to the front. Through the metal, deep enough for my fingertip to catch on when I traced them. The thermometer lay on the bottom of the oven, bent almost in half. I unplugged the oven again, even though I knew it didn't matter. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breath kept coming in short, panicked bursts. Sam. Lily stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Her lips were pale. Dad says the power flickered. What happened? I turned toward her, still holding the roasting pan like proof of something I didn't want to believe. We're ordering pizza, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. I'm not cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Not ever again. We never found the turkey. We looked, of course. My dad checked the trash, the fridge, the back porch, even the basement, convinced I'd had some kind of breakdown and thrown it somewhere. But there was no mess. No dripping juices. No feathers. Just those 3 deep gouges in the pan and a cold that clung to the kitchen for days afterward, no matter how high we turned up the heat. There's one more thing. Every now and then, late at night, when the house is quiet and the heater kicks on, I hear a sound from the kitchen. Soft at first. Easy to ignore if you don't want to think about it. Tap, tap, tap. Always from the direction of the stove. Like something testing the boundaries of whatever's keeping it in. I still have the roasting pan. I've thought about throwing it away a dozen times, but it feels like a bad idea to break the last physical link to what happened. The scratches are darker now, tinged with a faint, rust-colored stain that never quite washes out. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe grief finally cracked me and I hallucinated the whole thing. That's what I tell myself when the days are bright and my head is clear. But I know the truth every time Thanksgiving rolls around. I buy sides from the store. I microwave ham. I pretend the holiday isn't happening. Because somewhere, something that used to be cold and hungry remembers the heat of this house, the smell of butter and herbs, the feeling of an oven door opening. And I'm terrified that one year, I'll wake up to the smell of roasting turkey again, without having put anything in the oven. I was 24 the first time I spent Thanksgiving at Aunt Marion's house, and I only said yes because my mother wouldn't stop crying on the phone. She's the only family we have left on my side, Mom had said. It would mean a lot if we all went this year. For me, for your grandparents. I didn't remember my grandparents. They died when I was a baby, some kind of accident no one liked to talk about. Growing up, Mom's side of the family was just a vague phrase attached to a few faded photos and the occasional check on my birthday from an aunt I'd never met. So when we turned off the main road and up the long gravel driveway to a house I'd only seen in pictures, it felt less like visiting relatives and more like driving into a foggy blank space on a map. The house itself was big, old, and too quiet. 3 stories, dark brick, narrow windows. Bare trees scraped against the siding in the wind. As we pulled up, I noticed there were no other houses in sight. Just gray fields and a line of woods in the distance, branches like black ribs against a cloudy sky. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and roasting meat and something else underneath, something musty and sour like damp paper. Claire, a woman with iron-gray hair and a floral apron, swept me into a hug before I'd fully stepped over the threshold. Her arms were wiry strong, her cheek cool against mine. "Let me look at you." I stepped back. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless, but sharp. They flicked over my face like she was checking off details against a list. "You have your grandmother's nose," she said, "and his eyes." I didn't know who his was, and she didn't explain. "I'm so glad you came this year." The way she said "this year" made a little thread of unease tighten in my stomach. The rest of the afternoon was normal enough on the surface. Relatives I'd never met before introduced themselves. Cousins, great uncles, people who hugged me like I should remember them. Children ran through the halls, socked feet sliding on old wood floors. The TV in the living room murmured with football commentary. The kitchen was warm, crowded, steam fogging the windows, something heavy and sweet baking in the oven. But the longer I was there, the more I noticed gaps. No music, no background chatter from someone's phone. A lot of glancing at the old clock on the wall, the one with hands that ticked too loudly. The kids were noisy, but every time they got too loud, an adult would hush them. Not in the normal indoor voices way, but with quick, sharp warnings. Not yet. Not before. Before what no one said. At around 4:30, the light outside started to fade. That early winter dimness that makes everything feel a little unreal. Aunt Marion clapped her hands in the dining room. "All right," she said. "You know the order. Oldest first." One by one, my relatives started filing out of the room. No one took their coats. No one said where they were going. They just went, quietly, in an oddly neat line. I frowned. "Where are they going?" I asked my mom. She avoided my eyes. "It's just a little family tradition," she said. "We'll explain later." Later. Always later. I watched as my uncle disappeared through a doorway at the back of the hall. Then my mother, then cousins, then children. When my little second cousin came back a few minutes later, his face looked washed out. He climbed into a chair without a word, folding his hands in his lap like he'd been scolded. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. Each person came back like that, pale, silent, avoiding each other's faces, staring at the tablecloth or the centerpiece or nothing at all. The lively, messy warmth of a regular family gathering thinned out, stretched over something brittle and tense. Aunt Marion caught me watching the door. "Don't worry, Claire," she said. "We'll tell you when it's your turn." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. I forced a smile and pretended my heart hadn't started beating faster. When the only people left who hadn't gone through that door were me and two of the younger kids, Aunt Marion disappeared into the kitchen. My mom came back and touched my shoulder. "I need to help Marion with the gravy," she said. "Stay here, okay?" "What is this, some kind of prayer thing?" I asked. I tried to sound joking, but my voice came out thin. "We'll talk later," she said again, and that was when I realized she was shaking. They left me alone in the dining room. The house felt different now. The sounds were duller, like the walls were absorbing them. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied to a yellowish glow. I could hear footsteps somewhere below my feet, muted thumps and the faint creak of wood. Curiosity has always been my worst trait. I waited until I heard another set of feet on the stairs behind that back door entrance. Someone returning. The door opened. My older cousin stepped out, face blank, eyes fixed straight ahead. He walked past me without seeing me and sat down, hands flat on the table. "Hey," I whispered. "What's down there?" He blinked, slow, like he'd just woken up. His lips parted, then pressed together. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, and looked away. That did it. I slipped out of my chair, moved to the doorway like I was just stretching my legs. No one stopped me. From the hall, I could see the door they'd all gone through, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a narrow staircase led down into darkness, the air cooler by several degrees. A draft slid up the stairs, carrying a smell I couldn't place at first. Damp concrete, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The smell of unfinished basements and forgotten boxes. The smell of the crawl space under our old house where my dad kept things we weren't supposed to touch. I glanced back toward the kitchen. Voices murmured, low and tense. My name wasn't mentioned. If they wanted me to wait, they should have locked the door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, the sound loud in the narrow stairwell. The further I went, the colder it got. My fingers brushed the wall and came away dusty and slightly damp. Grit caught under my nails. At the bottom, my foot hit concrete. The basement was bigger than I expected. A wide open space beneath the house. Old shelves lined one wall, full of boxes and jars. A washing machine sat in the corner, silent and unplugged. The ceiling was low, pipes running along it like veins. The only light came from a cluster of old lanterns on the floor and on a single table in the center of the room. It wasn't a normal table. It was short, square, and old, the wood dark with age and oil. Carvings covered its surface. Lines and curves and symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in careful patterns. They weren't decorative. They didn't look like any language I knew either, more like instructions or a map. The lanterns cast a soft, unsteady glow over everything. The air around the table felt heavier, like stepping into a different temperature. My breath came out in little white streams. Goosebumps prickled up my arms. On and around the table, propped up carefully, were photographs. Dozens of them. Some were recent glossy prints like the ones on our fridge at home. Others were faded black and white, edges curled, corners cracked. The subjects were always family. People I'd met upstairs tonight, younger versions of them, older versions I'd never met. Kids, adults, couples, group shots. I recognized my mother in several, younger, hair darker. I stepped closer, frowning. Every single photo had the faces obscured. Not scratched off or cut out. Smeared. Streaks of something dark and greasy had been dragged across their faces, from forehead to chin, like someone had pressed their thumb into the ink and wiped. On some, the smear was fresh and glistening, almost wet-looking. On others, it had dried to a dull, cracked stain. The stuff wasn't paint. It had a thickness to it, a slight clumping at the edges. My stomach turned as I noticed the faint, rusty tint beneath the black. Blood, or something like it. I swallowed hard. My tongue suddenly thick in my mouth. Every photo, every face, all except one, my own. Near the center of the table, slightly raised on a little block of wood, was a photograph I vaguely remembered my mom taking last spring. I was at a park, sitting on a bench, hair pulled back, looking off to the side. In the picture, I'm mid-laugh, eyes crinkled. No smear, no mark. My face was clean and clear, my expression almost painfully alive compared to the others around it. I stared at it, at myself. A cold trickle ran down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I suddenly became aware of how quiet the basement was. No footsteps above me, no muffled talking, just the faint hiss of the lanterns and the sound of my own breathing, too loud in my ears. I should have gone back upstairs. I should have pretended I hadn't seen any of it. Instead, I reached out. My fingertips hovered a fraction of an inch above the surface of my photo, feeling the faint warmth from the lantern nearby. The air seemed thicker there, like invisible cobwebs clinging to my skin. "Don't," someone whispered. The word slid right against my ear, warm breath that smelled like dust and something sweet rotting under it. But when I spun around, there was no one standing behind me, just the shadows clinging to the corners of the room. The lanterns dimmed, all at once, like someone had put a hand over the flame of each. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. It sounded small, swallowed by the concrete and the low ceiling. Silence answered first. Then, a faint rustling, like old pages being turned. The carved table seemed to absorb the sound, the symbols almost shifting at the edge of my vision. "We were waiting," the voice said. "Closer. Everywhere. Inside my head and just over my shoulder at the same time." My throat went dry. My heart hammered against my ribs. "For what?" I whispered. The lanterns flared, then guttered lower, casting long, exaggerated shadows from the table legs and my own body. The photographs rustled, edges lifting as if disturbed by a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. "For you," the whisper replied. "For the one not yet marked." Something moved behind the photos. Not a shape I could see clearly, more like a bulge in the air itself, a place where the space was thicker. It pressed forward, testing the invisible line where the lantern light faded. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a crack in the floor. My hand brushed one of the smeared photos. The dark substance was tacky and cold, sticky against my skin. A metallic, coppery smell hit me so hard I gagged. In the photo I touched, a child's face glared out from behind the smear. For just a second, the eyes found mine through the streak. White, helpless, furious. I jerked away, wiping my hand on my jeans, leaving a dark streak that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Why my picture?" I managed to ask. "What is this?" The chuckle that followed was wrong. It didn't sound like one voice. It sounded like many, layered slightly out of sync, as if a family laughed over each other and the recording got warped. "Blood calls blood," it said. "Every year an offering, every year a name. They come to be spared. They come to be remembered." But the circle phrase, "The old ones fade. A new one must lead." Something brushed the back of my neck lightly, no heavier than a fingertip, and yet the cold that sunk into my skin made me hiss. The air smelled thicker now, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. "You look like her," it murmured. "The one who opened the door the first time." The one who asked, "What if we never had to lose anyone again?" My grandmother, I thought, though no one had said it. I saw her face in the faded photos, smeared like all the rest. "No," I said out loud. "Whatever they promised you, I didn't. I didn't agree to this." The thing behind the photos seemed to pulse, shadows bending around it like light around a deep pit. "They brought you," it said. "They brought your picture. They kept your face clean. They saved the place for you at the center. That is consent enough." The symbols carved into the table seemed to shimmer, as if lit from beneath. My head throbbed in rhythm with them, a low, insistent pounding. I realized my own photograph had shifted. It now sat dead center, angled directly toward me. The edges of the room blurred. The lantern light tunneled, growing narrower until the world was just the table, the photos, and that thick, pressing presence between them. Somewhere far away, I heard a door creak. The spell broke. I turned and ran. My feet pounded up the stairs, breath ripping in and out of me. The air grew warmer with every step, but the cold from the basement clung to my back like a wet hand. I burst through the door into the hall, chest heaving. Everyone was waiting. My entire family was gathered in the dining room, just beyond the doorway. They stood around the table, chairs pushed back, plates untouched. No one was talking. No one was moving. Every eye turned toward me at once. I froze. They weren't surprised to see me. They weren't angry. They looked expectant, like actors waiting for their cue. My mother's face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. She held her hands clasped so tight in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. Aunt Marion stood at the head of the table, chin raised, her apron smeared with something darker than gravy. "You weren't supposed to go alone," my mother whispered. "You weren't supposed to rush it," Aunt Marion said sharply. Then softer, "But maybe it's fitting. She's always been curious." There was no warmth in the way she said it. No fondness, just resignation. My little cousins peered at me from behind their parents' legs, eyes huge. One of them, the boy who'd come up from the basement earlier, had a faint dark streak down his cheek, like something had been wiped away from near his eye. Behind me, the open basement door breathed cold. I took a step backward without meaning to. The drop in temperature was immediate. The hairs on my arms rose again. "What did you do?" I asked them. My voice shook. "What is this?" No one answered. Instead, as if responding to some silent signal, they all did the same thing. They stared at me, not at my face, not exactly. More like, past it, through it. Their eyes were unfocused, pupils too wide. Their chests rose and fell in slow, synchronized breaths. My mother's lips moved, barely. "Say the blessing, Claire," she whispered. "You're the only one it will listen to now." The word blessing landed like something obscene. "I don't know the words," I said. My throat was tight. "I don't want to know." "You will," Aunt Marion said. "It will tell you." It started already, didn't it? The whisper at my ear, the voice in the dark, behind my ribs. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. My legs felt numb. No one moved toward me. No one grabbed my arm or pushed me back toward the stairs. They just stood there, surrounding the table, staring, as if I were a piece of meat they were presenting to something that lived under their house. As if they were waiting for me to go back down, or worse, for it to come up. "You wanted to know what we do for Thanksgiving," my aunt said quietly. "We survive, year after year, because someone goes down and promises." "And what do you promise?" I asked, though I already knew, didn't I? The smeared faces, the clear one, my own. She held my gaze, her eyes flat and empty. "That we'll always have a full table," she said. "No empty chairs. No more sudden losses. The old ones, the forgotten ones, they sit with us still. As long as we keep the bargain. As long as someone leads the blessing." The house creaked softly around us. The lights flickered, briefly, like something brushed against the wires. A breeze slid up from the basement, past my calves, wrapping around my knees. It was colder than before, hungrier. In the quiet, I heard it again. A whisper, not in my ear this time, but from the open stairwell behind me. from the concrete room below, from the table with my face in the center. "Come back," it said. "We were waiting for you." My family didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched me, as if I were the one who needed to decide whether Thanksgiving dinner would happen this year at all. I stood there, trapped between the cold breath of the basement and the warm, suffocating expectation of the people who were supposed to love me, and, for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly cornered. I still haven't decided which is worse, that I might go back down those stairs one day, or that, if I don't, something that's been patient for generations might finally decide to come the rest of the way up. I wasn't supposed to be on that road. If the GPS hadn't glitched, if the storm hadn't rolled in early, if I'd paid more attention to the gas gauge. Pick one. There were 100 tiny, stupid decisions that lined up and nudged me off the highway and onto a narrow 2-lane strip of asphalt cutting through nowhere. I was just trying to get home for Thanksgiving. It was late afternoon when I took the wrong exit. By the time I realized the alternate route my GPS suggested was more suggestion than route, the sky had turned that flat, bruised purple that comes before snow. The radio crackled with static. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar, then to nothing at all. I remember glancing down at the dashboard. A quarter tank. Plenty, I thought. Then the road curved, trees thickened on both sides, and the world shrank to my headlights, the yellow lines like a lifeline under the tires. The first snow started as a fine, dry dust across the windshield, hissing softly under the wipers. The temperature in the car dropped a few degrees. Somewhere behind my ribs, anxiety stirred and sat up straight. The GPS lost its mind entirely, spinning, recalculating, telling me to turn around on a road with no shoulder and no lights. The map showed me as a blue dot floating in blank gray. "Great," I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "Really great." I'd been driving for almost an hour without seeing another car when I saw the house. It appeared out of the dark like someone had switched on a set in front of my headlights. 1 second, trees and snow and nothing. The next, a farmhouse. Warm orange light glowed in every window, soft and steady. A wraparound porch hugged the front, lined with potted plants that shouldn't have been alive in November. Fat geraniums and something trailing and green. The house itself was a deep, comforting red, white trim neat and freshly painted. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. And the smell. It seeped into the car before I even turned into the long gravel driveway. At first I thought I was imagining it, some brain ghost from childhood Thanksgivings. But it got stronger as I pulled closer. Cinnamon. Not just cinnamon. Cinnamon and butter and sugar, that dense, rich smell of something baking. Snickerdoodles, maybe, or cinnamon rolls. It wrapped around me, warm and sweet and ridiculously inviting, cutting straight through my nerves and fatigue. It smelled like safety. I parked in front of the house, gravel crunching under the tires. The engine ticked as it cooled. For a second, I just sat there, fingers curled around the steering wheel, staring at the front door. It was painted a cheerful blue. A wreath of dried orange slices and cinnamon sticks hung in the center. I knew I should have kept driving, knocked on someone's door closer to town. But if I'd kept going, I might have ended up in a ditch. That's what I told myself when I stepped out into the cold, breath fogging the air. By the time my knuckles brushed the wood of the door, it opened. The woman standing there looked like she'd been cut out of a Thanksgiving commercial. Soft gray hair pulled into a bun, apron over a patterned dress, cheeks faintly pink from the heat of the kitchen. Lines fanned from the corners of her eyes, but they were smoothed by the constant, gentle smile on her face. "Well, look at you," she said, as if she'd been expecting me. Her voice was warm, honeyed, with a faint accent I couldn't place. "You must be freezing. Come in, dear. Come in." I hesitated. "Sorry, my car's GPS crapped out. I'm a little lost. I was just wondering if you could point me back toward." "Of course," she said over me, stepping aside. The wave of heat that hit me from inside was almost dizzying. Beneath the cinnamon, I could smell roasted meat, yeast bread, coffee. "But you're not going anywhere on an empty stomach." "Harold," she called over her shoulder. "We've got a traveler." A man appeared in the hallway behind her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was tall, shoulders still broad despite his age, hair white and neatly combed. He wore a plaid shirt and suspenders. His smile matched hers exactly, same shape, same fixed warmth. "Well now," he said, eyes crinkling. "You poor thing. Roads out there are a mess this time of year. Come in, son. We always keep a seat ready for travelers." That phrase should have landed differently. It should have tripped some internal alarm. But the house was so warm, and I was so tired, and the cinnamon smell hooked into some deep, soft place in me. I stepped over the threshold. The floorboards under my boots were smooth and solid, giving a little under my weight. The entryway was small, walls papered in a faded floral pattern. Coat hooks held neatly arranged jackets and scarves. A lamp on a side table cast a soft glow, light glancing off framed photos. "Here," the woman said. "Shoes off, dear. We don't track the outside in here. I'm Margaret, and this is Harold." "I'm Derek," I said, fingers stiff as I untied my boots. The air warmed them instantly, tingling my skin. The cinnamon smell was stronger inside, richer, almost syrupy. It clung to the back of my throat. "Derek." Margaret tasted the name like a new dessert recipe. "Lovely. Come on through." The dining room looked like something out of an old painting. A long wooden table ran almost the length of the room, polished so well the light from the chandelier shone in it. A white tablecloth, ironed crisp, lay over it, edges hanging evenly. Plates, wine glasses, silverware, all laid out perfectly, all identical. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places on each side. One at the head, one at the far end. 12 settings, 11 empty chairs. One nearest my side already pulled out. "My seat." "Please," Harold said, gesturing. "Sit, sit. You look like you've driven all day." "I have actually," I said, half laughing as I sank into the chair. The cushion was surprisingly soft, molding to me. "I really don't want to impose. I just need directions and maybe the nearest gas station." Margaret waved a hand. "Plenty of time for that. Food first. It's almost Thanksgiving, dear. No one leaves our house hungry." She disappeared into the kitchen, humming something tuneless. Harold poured me a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. The water was cold, beads of condensation slipping down the sides. His hands were steady, his smile never wavering. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Briar Falls," I said. "My parents live there." I was trying to beat the weather. His eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat. "Ah," he said. "Family. That's good. Family is important." The way he said it made me think of my mom's face when she said, "Call when you get there. Okay?" Before I left, I pushed the thought away. Margaret returned with food. Turkey carved thick, mashed potatoes smooth and pale, green beans glossy with butter, fresh rolls, steam wisping from torn edges. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The turkey skin was golden and even, no burnt spots, no pale patches. The mashed potatoes held their shape just enough, no lumps. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since late morning. We ate. The first bite of turkey was so good it made my eyes water. Moist, savory, exactly right. The potatoes melted on my tongue. The cinnamon smell seemed to thicken the flavors, wrapping them in nostalgia, each chew unspooling a memory. My dad basting a turkey, my mom sprinkling spice on a pie, my sister sneaking cookie dough from the bowl. "You cook much?" Margaret asked, watching me with that same gentle smile. "Not like this," I said, which was true. "This is amazing." Harold chuckled. "We've had a lot of practice. We've been hosting travelers for a long, long time." "Yeah." I reached for my water. The glass was slick in my fingers. "How long have you lived out here?" "Oh," Margaret said, tilting her head. "Forever, it feels like. This house has always been good to us. We like to give back." Something about the phrasing made me glance away, toward the walls. That's when I noticed the photos. They covered almost every inch of visible wall space, from waist height up to the ceiling. Frames touched frames in a patchwork of wood and metal, some ornate, some simple. There was no obvious order. Old sepia-toned pictures mingled with full-color prints, Polaroids next to glossy enlargements. In every photo, people sat at this table. Sometimes one person alone, sometimes a couple, sometimes a family squeezed shoulder to shoulder. Different faces, young, old, men, women, kids. Sometimes a suitcase was visible in the background, or a heavy coat hung on the back of a chair. In one, a man in a delivery uniform grinned, cap crooked. In another, a woman held a baby at her chest, eyes tired but soft. Always at the table, always in this room. I slowed chewing, swallowing with effort. Wow, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Big family. Margaret's smile didn't change. We've had many guests. I stood up, plate in hand, pretending I needed more potatoes just to get closer to the nearest frame. The glass was cool under my fingertips. The photograph showed a teenage boy, hoodie logo half visible, hair flopped over one eye. He was mid-laugh, fork in hand. The timestamp in the corner read November 23rd, 13. I looked for him in the other photos. I didn't see him. I tried another. A woman in her 30s, curly hair pulled into a ponytail, inked letters peeking from under her sleeve. November 27th, 19. She too appeared only once. None of the faces repeated. In every single photo, the only constant figures were Margaret and Harold. Sometimes one, sometimes both, sometimes a hand on a shoulder, sometimes hovering in the background, half in shadow, always smiling. My heart picked up speed. "You all right, dear?" Margaret asked behind me. I jumped, nearly dropping my plate. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Sorry, just noticing all these. Do you keep in touch with everyone?" Harold's eyes met mine across the table. It was the first time his smile looked strained at the edges. "No," he said. "We don't." A draft brushed the back of my neck, cool against the warmth of the room. The cinnamon smell, for a second, shifted. Underneath the spice there was something else, faint but real, like cooked meat left out a little too long. Something sweet turned sour. I set my plate down. "I should probably get going," I said. "My parents will worry if I'm too late. And the roads." "Oh, but you've hardly eaten," Margaret said. She moved closer, hands clasped loosely in front of her. "There's pie, coffee. We'll send you off with something warm in your belly. You don't want to drive sleepy." "I have a long drive," I said. My fingers itched for my car keys. "If you can just point me toward the highway, I'll." Their smiles changed. They didn't disappear. They stretched. It was subtle at first, the corners of their mouths pulling a little too far. The skin at their cheeks didn't bunch the way it should have. Their eyes stayed wide and dry, unblinking. "We're so happy you came," Harold said. His voice had flattened. The warmth drained out. "No one ever leaves," Margaret added softly. The words sat in the air between us, heavy and matter-of-fact, like they weren't a threat, like they were a simple description. My body reacted before my brain did. A full-body jolt, adrenaline flooding my limbs. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. The cinnamon smell pressed against my sinuses, suddenly cloying, suffocating. I started, then stopped. Fight, flight, freeze. I'd always wondered what I'd do. Turns out I run. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and moved toward the hallway. Harold stepped slightly to the side, like he was going to block me, then stopped. His smile stayed fixed. Margaret's fingers curled at her sides. "Derek," she said, "it's rude to leave before dessert." "Sorry," I said, my voice too loud, too bright. "I'm rude." I didn't wait to see their reactions. I crossed the entryway in what I told myself was a fast walk, not a sprint, hand reaching blindly for my boots. The smell followed me, thick, pressing. As I bent down, something cold brushed the back of my neck. Not air, not a draft, a touch. Fingers, featherlight, right at the base of my skull. I flinched forward, heart hammering. The coat rack rattled. A framed photo beside the door tilted on its nail, glass catching the light as it shifted. My eye caught it. For a split second, I saw myself. Same table, same chair, my coat hanging in the background. My face caught in mid-laugh, head tipped just so. The timestamp in the corner read a date that hadn't happened yet. I yanked the door open. The air outside hit me like a slap, sharp, freezing, clean. The cinnamon clung to it, though, hanging in a visible haze for a heartbeat before the wind tore it away. Gravel slid under my boots as I ran to the car. The keys shook in my hands so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. I didn't look back. When the engine caught, the noise was the best sound I've ever heard. Headlights flared, cutting across the front of the house. For just an instant, as I swung the car around, I saw Margaret and Harold framed in the doorway. They didn't step outside. They just stood there, side by side, watching me go. Smiling so wide their faces seemed stretched thin, as if something underneath was pushing against the skin, impatient. The cinnamon smell was inside the car now, thick and strong, like someone had dumped a bottle of spice on the floorboards. I rolled the windows down, gasping cold air, eyes stinging. The house shrank in the rearview mirror, then vanished behind trees and snow and curve of road. I drove without thinking, without GPS, turning whenever the road let me, until eventually I saw the forgiving glow of highway lights and the comforting ugliness of a gas station sign. I made it to my parents' house 3 hours later. I hugged my mother a little too hard. I blamed the smell on a candle someone must have been burning when they wrinkled their noses and said, "You smell like cinnamon." It lingered in my car for days. No matter how many times I cleaned the upholstery, aired it out, left the windows cracked overnight, the scent stayed. Not faint, strong, heavy. It soaked into my clothes. It wormed its way into my dreams. Eventually, it faded. Mostly, every so often, driving alone at night, I'll catch it again. Sweet, warm, impossible to ignore. I check the mirrors, the back seat, the dark stretch of road behind me. I tell myself it's just a memory, that there's no house on any map where kind old strangers keep a seat ready for travelers and hang their faces on the walls afterward. I tell myself I left. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that photo by the door, the one with me in it, the date stamped in the corner, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in a farmhouse that always smells like cinnamon, there's already a place set for me at the table, waiting. The first time I saw the Thanksgiving parade in Ashfield, I was 6 years old and half my height. I remember the smell of hot chocolate and exhaust fumes, my dad's gloved hand wrapped around mine, the way the trumpets blared just a little out of tune as the high school band marched by. It was the only thing our town did that felt bigger than it was. No fancy lights, no big city sponsors, just a ragged line of floats, a couple of giant balloons, and the entire population of Ashfield crammed 3 deep along Main Street, pretending the whole thing wasn't held together with duct tape and nostalgia. I'm 28 now. I had moved away like you're supposed to, gone to college, gotten a job in Boston. But last November, my mom called and said, "Come home this year, Noah. For the parade, at least. Your father, he won't say it, but he misses you." The way her voice caught on that "won't say it" made me buy a bus ticket that night. So that's why I was there that morning, standing on the same cracked patch of sidewalk in front of Harriman's Hardware, coffee cooling between my hands, breath smoking in the cold. Mom had looped her arm through mine the way she used to when I was a teenager. Dad stood on my other side, hands buried in the pockets of his old army jacket, staring down the street. It was gray, cold, the kind of November morning where the air smells like frost and chimney smoke. Kids hopped from foot to foot, paper cups clutched in red fingers. Someone's dog barked down the block. The street was lined with barricades borrowed from the county, orange and white plastic dulled by years of use. At exactly 9, the church bells started to ring. Usually, that was the cue for the first drum cadence to roll up from the far end of Maine. A faint thump-thump-thump that grew into a full-body sound as the marching band came into view. This time, there was nothing. Just the bells, echoing off brick and glass, counting off 12 slow notes. When they stopped, the silence felt heavier, like the air had thickened. "Maybe they're running late," Mom murmured, but I saw the tight line of her mouth. Then we heard it, the grind of the old tractor they used to pull the first float. The crowd shifted, a ripple of movement. People craned their necks. Kids climbed onto curbs, the usual choreography. The first float appeared, turning onto Maine from Oak. It was the same flatbed trailer as always. Plywood walls painted with turkeys and pilgrims, bales of hay. Kids from the elementary school usually sat on top, waving like they were in a pageant. They were there. They just weren't moving. 3 kids sat side by side on the bale at the front, hands in their laps, back straight. They wore the usual construction paper hats and feathered headbands, cheeks smudged with face paint. But their faces, they were blank. Too blank. Mouths closed. Eyes forward. No smiles, no shy waves, no whispering to each other. They stared straight ahead like mannequins. Nobody said anything at first. The tractor rattled past. The driver hunched in his seat, cap pulled low. I looked for the telltale jerk of his hands on the wheel, the little corrections as he navigated the turn. His hands were on the wheel. They weren't moving. His fingers were curled around the rubber, knuckles pale, but the wheel didn't twitch. The tractor rolled forward with the same steady speed, like it was being pulled on a string. The float creaked by. The kids' eyes didn't track the crowd. One of them had a tear frozen at the corner of her eye, catching the weak light. It didn't fall. My coffee suddenly tasted sour. Is this part of it? I asked. Dad grunted. Weird, he said. That was all. The high school marching band should have come next. I heard the jangle of their uniforms before I saw them, the clink of metal buttons, the soft thud of feet on asphalt. They turned onto Maine in tidy rows, instruments gleaming in the gray light, trumpets, trombones, clarinets, drums. Plumes bobbed on their hats. Their mouths were in the right positions. Flutes and reeds to lips, trumpets pointed forward, drummers' hands raised. No sound, not a single note. They marched in perfect silence, legs moving in perfect unison. You could hear their shoes hitting the pavement, the whisper of fabric, the faint rattle of snares with no sticks on them. But the instruments were dead weight. No breath, no vibration. Play something! A man behind me yelled, trying to sound jovial. His voice fell flat. No one in the band flinched. I watched a girl I recognized from the grocery store. Emma, the cashier with the blue streak in her hair, march past with a clarinet frozen at her mouth. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown, staring straight ahead, not blinking, not once. I checked my phone, suddenly desperate for some stupid update that would explain all this. No service, just 9:23 in the corner, ticking forward. The floats that followed got stranger. The pilgrim ship moved with no driver in the truck cab, steering wheel untouched. The fake cornucopia on the bed spilled plastic fruit into the street every few feet, bright oranges and rubber grapes tumbling under the tires, but no one stepped out to pick them up like the kids normally did. They just rolled, crushed into smeared colors. The Harvest Queen sat on a throne of hay, tiara gleaming, bouquet in hand. Her sash was crooked, letters spelling out Miss SHFELD in glitter. Her face was smooth as porcelain. Her eyes didn't seem to focus on anything at all. I realized, slowly, that every performer looked wrong not because of makeup or masks, but because they didn't have expressions. Not boredom, not nerves, not excitement, just empty. The crowd started to murmur. I heard snippets of conversation. Is this some kind of art thing? Where's the music? There's always music. Why aren't they blinking? A child started crying somewhere to my left. A thin, high sound. His mother shushed him, eyes locked on the parade. The giant balloons came last, like always. That was the town's favorite part. 2 giant helium shapes that floated above the street, tethered by teams of volunteers in matching shirts. One was a turkey, one was a cartoonish ear of corn. They bobbed in the wind, tails flicking. They were there. They drifted into view, colors muted under the gray sky, fabric rippling slightly. The turkey's painted eyes stared down, comically wide. There were no handlers. The strings hung down, ropes thick as wrists, but no one held them. They dragged along the ground, snaking between people's legs. No one tripped. The ropes arched and dipped as if held by invisible hands. A knot was forming in my stomach now, hard and heavy. My fingers had gone numb where they clutched my cup. "Mom," I said quietly, "we should go." She didn't answer. I turned to look at her and felt my stomach drop another inch. Her eyes were fixed on the street, lips parted, breath coming in shallow pulls. Her pupils were too big, swallowing the brown. Dad stood rigid beside her, jaw clenched, but his gaze was locked on the moving line of floats. "Hey!" I nudged his arm. "Dad." He didn't blink. A cold sweat broke out along my shoulders, damp under my jacket. The air felt wrong, dense, buzzing faintly just at the edge of hearing. The last float was coming. It was new. I'd never seen it before. It was bigger than the others, taller, painted a flat, featureless white. No decorations, no theme, just a long white platform moving steadily down the center of the street. There were people standing on it. Dozens of them, shoulder to shoulder, no railings to keep them from falling. They wore Thanksgiving clothes, sweaters, jackets, scarves. Some had hats. Some had bare heads with hair blowing in the light wind. Their arms hung at their sides. Their chests rose and fell. They were the right size, the right shape. They could have been any of us. Their faces were empty. No brows, no lines, no creases. It was like someone had smoothed clay where features should be and then, as an afterthought, pressed in two glassy human eyes. Those eyes were open, wide, unblinking. As the float drew level with us, something in the air shifted, like pressure easing after a storm front passes. The faint buzzing in my ears swelled for a second, almost like distant singing buried under static. Then, in one identical movement, every performer in the parade stopped. The band's feet came together, instruments dropping a fraction of an inch. The kids on the floats went still. The balloons overhead halted, ropes snapping taut. On the final float, the faceless people lifted their heads in unison. All down Main Street, from the first tractor to the last tire, everyone in the parade turned toward the crowd at the exact same time. Not just turned, snapped. The sound of dozens of necks moving at once cracked down the street like a branch breaking. Those eyes on the faceless ones, on the kids, on the band, locked onto us, onto me. For a moment, everything was held, pinned. My chest forgot how to breathe. My heart hammered against a wall of ice. Then they smiled. Not just lips, not just mouths. The expression rolled over their faces like something pushing from underneath, stretching skin too tight. On the faceless float, features bloomed where there had been none, mouths blossoming open, teeth too small and too many filling the space. The kids' lips peeled back. The band's cheeks split into identical grins. The smile wasn't happy. It was hungry. Hands in the crowd shot out for their children. People started backing up, stumbling, a few tripping over the curb into the slush behind us. Someone screamed, high and thin and animal. I grabbed my mother's sleeve. "We're leaving," I said, voice shaking. "Now." Her head turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were wet, but her lips were moving, forming words I couldn't quite hear. I leaned closer. "They see us," she whispered. "We stood too close." "What does that?" A gust of wind tore through the street, sharp enough to sting my eyes. The balloons above dipped low, shadows swallowing us for a heartbeat. The rope brushed my shoulder. Where it touched, the fabric of my jacket went numb with cold. The performers stepped forward. Not all at once. Not dramatically. One step all together like a line advancing in a drill. The street was between us. Barricades. Space. But that step made something in my body decide, without my input, that if I stayed another second, I would never move again. I don't remember dropping my coffee. I don't remember grabbing my parents' hands. One moment I was standing there. The next I was shoving us backward through the crowd, saying, "Excuse me, sorry, move," in a voice that didn't sound like mine. We broke into a side street, boots slipping on wet pavement. Behind us, the murmur of the crowd changed, splintered into cries, shouts, a strange, Thin laughter that didn't sound like any of my neighbors. I didn't look back until we reached our car. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the parade was still there, but wrong. The floats had drifted out of line, angled toward the sidewalks. The band spread, instruments held like dead weight. The final float had stopped entirely at the center of Maine. Faceless figures standing at the edge, as if ready to step off. My parents moved like sleepwalkers. I bundled them into the car, hands clumsy on the keys, breath coming too fast. We didn't go home. I drove straight out of town. By evening, we were in a motel 2 towns over. Stale cigarette smell soaked into the curtains. TV flickering with local news. That's how we found out. They called it a mass disappearance event. They showed footage from news stations that had arrived too late. Cameras panning over an empty main street. Floats abandoned. Balloons deflated. Fabric sagging in the cold. Instruments scattered like dropped toys. Footsteps in the slush. Half the town was gone. Not all at once. Not neatly. Just pockets. People who'd been on the sidewalks, people who'd lived along the parade route, people who'd stepped outside to watch from porches. Their cars still in driveways. Their doors still unlocked. No bodies. No tracks leaving town. Just absence. They interviewed people who'd watched from windows, from rooftops, from too far back to see details. They talked about the silence. They talked about the feeling that something had noticed them. I didn't tell them what I saw. I didn't tell them about the way every head turned at once, or the moment those blank faces grew smiles. I didn't tell them about the way my mother still wakes up at 3 a.m., staring at the wall, lips moving with words she won't say out loud. We moved a month later. My parents sold the house they'd lived in for 30 years. Ashfield shrank on the news, a mystery, then a tragedy, then just one more thing in a long list of things people don't understand. But every Thanksgiving morning, without fail, at exactly 9, I hear it. Not bells, not music, a faint, distant sound, like many feet hitting pavement in perfect unison. It seems to come from everywhere at once, the hallway, the street, the space under my bed. If I look out the window, there's nothing there. Just whatever street we live on now, whatever town my parents try next, pretending we can outrun something that knows how we smell. This year, I watched my reflection in the glass instead of the empty road. For a second, just a second, my face was blank, features smoothed away, too wide, unblinking eyes staring back. Then my mouth pulled into a smile. Too wide, too slow. I stepped back and blinked, and it was just me again. Just my tired, scared face. I tell myself it was a trick of the light. I tell myself we left early enough, stood far enough back, that whatever rules govern that parade don't apply to us. But sometimes, in that half-sleep just before dawn, I swear I can see a white float moving slowly past the end of my street. Faceless figures turning their heads in perfect sync, scanning the houses, checking the windows, looking for the ones who got away. My grandmother's house always smelled like boiled cabbage and pine sol, no matter what she was cooking. You'd think Thanksgiving would overpower it, the turkey, the stuffing, the pies, but somehow that faint, sour vegetable smell clung to everything. It lived in the curtains, in the couch cushions, in the yellowed lace doilies under every knickknack. It lived in her. "Olivia, grab those rolls, will you?" Mom called from the dining room. I was 21, home from college, officially too old to be drafted into kitchen duty, but refusing Grandma wasn't an option. I balanced a basket of rolls on one hip, shouldered the swinging door open, and stepped into the stale warmth of the dining room. Grandma sat at the head of the table, small and straight-backed, silver hair pinned into a tight bun. Her eyes were the same sharp gray they'd always been, flicking around the table while everyone settled. My uncle uncorked wine. My little cousins squabbled over who got the good chair. Dad rubbed his hands together, looking at the turkey like it was the answer to all his problems. It was normal, or close enough. "Now this," Uncle Mark said, carving the turkey with exaggerated reverence. "This is why I come back every year. Mom's food could feed an army." Grandma's lips thinned into what passed for a smile. "It's a sin to waste," she said. "So I don't." They all laughed. They always made the same joke. How her leftovers lasted for weeks. How she could turn scraps into meals. As a kid, I'd believed it was magic. As a teenager, it was a punchline. Now, as I watched her washing the platters circle the table, I felt something else. She didn't fill her plate. She just took a small slice of turkey, a spoonful of stuffing, a perfectly square piece of cranberry sauce. Her eyes tracked every bit that moved from dish to plate, like she was counting. Dinner was loud and hot and exhausting. The radiator hissed under the window. Someone spilled gravy. The overhead light buzzed, a faint stutter every few seconds. I let the conversation wash over me. My parents' arguments in disguise, my cousins' stories about school, long-winded tales from relatives I barely remembered. I stared at the turkey carcass as it slowly picked down to bone. "Leave some on there," Grandma said when Dad started stripping the last bits of meat. "I'll take care of the rest." "That's where the magic happens," he joked. "Tomorrow's turkey soup, turkey hash, turkey casserole, turkey mystery," I muttered under my breath. Grandma's gaze flicked to me from the far end of the table. Just for a second. Her eyes were sharp enough to snip words in half. I looked away, suddenly interested in my mashed potatoes. By 9, everyone was sluggish and glassy-eyed. The relatives who lived farther out started bundling themselves into coats, kissing cheeks, calling goodbyes down the hallway. My parents stayed to help clean. My dad washed dishes while my mom tried to stack Grandma's mismatched Tupperware the way she liked it. I escaped under the pretense of taking the trash out. The night outside was cold and damp, air thick with chimney smoke and the metallic tang of impending snow. When I came back in, the kitchen smelled intensely of leftovers. Gravy, onions, grease, which layered over the permanent boiled cabbage base note until it felt like breathing someone else's breath. The counter was covered in containers. Neat rows of them, plastic tubs, old margarine tubs, even glass jars with masking tape labels. Mom was scooping mashed potatoes into one. Grandma stood at the fridge, placing things carefully inside, rearranging shelves to make room. "How long do you think this will all last?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "As long as it needs to," Grandma said. She didn't turn around. "You taking some home?" "Maybe a little," I said. "College food is garbage." Her shoulders moved with a dry chuckle. "I'll make you a bag. Go rest. You look peaked." I didn't feel tired, but arguing with her was pointless. I kissed my parents goodnight, accepted Grandma's pinch on my cheek, and headed upstairs to the guest room. The old house creaked around me, the sound familiar and unnerving all at once. My room smelled faintly of dust and lavender sachets. I lay on the bed scrolling through my phone, waiting for my food coma to pass. Every so often, the floorboards groaned below as someone moved around the kitchen. The fridge door thumped shut. Cabinet doors clicked. The radiator clanked and sighed. When I finally got up to use the bathroom, it was almost midnight. The upstairs hallway was lit only by a small nightlight at the far end, its blue glow making the wallpaper look sickly. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. A line of dim yellow light cut across the lower landing, the kitchen light, still on. "Mom," I whispered, suddenly uneasy. No answer. Against my better judgment, I crept halfway down. From my vantage point, I could see just enough of the kitchen. The edge of the table, the doorway, the open refrigerator casting its cold white glow. Grandma stood in front of it, back to me, in her faded nightgown. The fridge shelves were jammed with containers, stacked in precarious towers. Her hand reached in and came out with a tub, the old margarine kind with a faded logo. She held it up, turning it slowly, like she was admiring a snow globe. The light glinted off its cloudy plastic. Then she cracked the lid. The smell hit me even from the stairs. Sharp, coppery. Wrong. Not rotten food. Not sour milk. Something different. Something that pulled at some animal part of my brain that wanted to run. Grandma inhaled deeply. Her shoulders rose and fell. "We don't waste," she murmured, voice so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "We use what we're given." I backed up the stairs on silent feet, heart thudding. I told myself I'd misheard. that she was just muttering nonsense the way old people do, that the smell was my imagination. In the morning, I forgot about it, or I tried to. The sunlight made the kitchen look normal again. Mom was already up, hair a mess, making coffee. Dad pretended to read the paper. The fridge hummed quietly, door closed. "Grab whatever leftovers you want before we go," Mom said. "Your grandmother will keep the rest." While they finished their coffee, I opened the fridge. They hadn't been exaggerating. It was full, like impossibly full. Every shelf, every drawer, even the door compartments were crammed with containers, labeled in Grandma's cramped handwriting. But something was off. There were way too many. We hadn't cooked that much food. I remembered the spread. I remembered who'd eaten what, how many people had taken leftovers home last night. This was more. Double, maybe triple what there should have been. A little knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I reached for a container at random, one of the unlabeled margarine tubs in the back. It was heavy in my hand, condensation beating on the inside of the lid. The plastic felt soft, warmer than it should have, like it had been held a long time. I peeled the lid back. Inside was hair. Not a clump from a brush, not a loose tangle. Long strands neatly coiled into a spiral, packed tight. Dark brown with a few gray threads. Some caught the light with an oily sheen. They lay in a bed of something jelly-like and pale like fat. I frowned, stomach flipping. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank. My second was that maybe Grandma was saving hair for a wig or some old-fashioned craft project. Then I noticed the ends. They weren't bluntly cut. They tapered. Some had darker roots, tiny flecks of pink at the very base, like they'd been pulled out. I slammed the lid back on, heart pounding. My hands moved on their own, shoving it behind a stack of turkey and stuffing containers like I hadn't seen it. Don't be dramatic, I told myself. Old people are weird. There's an explanation. Another tub sat near the front, small and round, labeled in pencil I couldn't quite read. I opened it. Bits of cloth, torn, stained. A button still attached to one piece cracked down the middle. A tiny embroidered rose on another. The stitching frayed. The fabric was stiff, edges curled. One scrap had a faint brown smear on it that my brain refused to name. The third container stopped my breath entirely. It was clear glass, no label, pushed to the side like an afterthought. Inside, something clicked against the glass when I picked it up. Fingernails. Dozens of them. Some small, some wide. Some smooth and yellowed, others jagged, torn, a few with crescents of dried brown underneath. They clattered softly as I tilted the jar, a sound like beetles in a cup. I was still staring when Grandma's voice floated over my shoulder. "Olivia!" I almost dropped the jar. When I turned, she was standing in the doorway, robe tied tight, slippers silent on the tile. Her eyes flicked from my face to the jar and back. My mouth worked, but no sound came out. "We don't waste what's given to us," she said calmly. She might as well have been commenting on the weather. "What is this?" I finally managed. My throat felt tight. "What are you? Why do you have this?" She moved past me, slow but sure, taking the jar from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, cool and dry as paper. "Old habits," she said. "Old debts. When something's taken, something must be kept. Leftovers. Reminders. That's..." My voice cracked. "That's not normal, Grandma. That's..." She smiled at me then, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "It kept us safe," she said softly. "Mostly." "From what?" Her gaze slid toward the fridge, then back to me. For a second, I thought she was going to tell me. Really tell me. Instead, she just patted my cheek. "You let your mother make up a plate for you," she said. "You go back to your life. No need for you to learn old recipes." I wanted to push. I wanted to shake her, to demand an answer. Instead, I let her guide me back to the table, sat in a chair while Mom packed good leftovers into a bag, accepted hugs and warnings to drive safe. We left just after noon. By the time we got home, the hair and the nails and the way Grandma had said "mostly" had been pushed into a corner of my mind labeled "deal with later." I didn't sleep that night. Maybe my brain knew there wouldn't be a later. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone painting my hands blue. Shadows from the streetlight outside made patterns on the wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that jar, the nails clinking against the glass. Somewhere around 3, my eyelids finally got heavy. The house was quiet, no pipes groaning, no parents moving. I was right on the edge of sleep when I heard it. The fridge door. It was unmistakable. That soft suction sound of a seal breaking, the faint creak of hinges. But it was wrong too. Slower, stretched out, like the door resisted. I lay there, very still, heart suddenly slamming. This is stupid, I told myself. It's probably Dad getting a snack. Or Mom. Or the house settling. Then I heard the footsteps. Wet. A sticky, muffled slap on the linoleum, followed by a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled. Step, drag, step, drag. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the kitchen across tile, then onto carpet. The sound changed there, duller, squelching, leaving dark spots in my imagination. They were not my father's footsteps, not my mother's. Too heavy and too unsteady at the same time, like a pile of meat trying to remember how legs worked. The hallway outside my room creaked. The light seeping under my door darkened for a second, as if something passed in front of it. I held my breath, every muscle locked. My brain screamed at me to get up, to lock the door, to call out, but my body was a statue. The thing outside my room stopped. Silence pressed in, thick as wool. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd imagined everything. Then, very softly, something wet slid against the wood of my door, a sound like a hand smearing across it. My phone vibrated in my hand, a silent notification. I almost screamed from the shock. The buzzing stopped. The world was quiet again. The handle didn't turn. The door didn't open. After an eternity, the footsteps started up again, moving past my room. Step, drag, down the hall, down the stairs. Slower now, weaker. I listened until I heard the faintest suggestion of the fridge door again. Not closing, not sealing, just touching the frame. I didn't sleep after that. I lay awake until pale blue seeped around the edges of the blinds. When I finally forced myself out of bed, legs shaking, the house smelled normal. Coffee, toast, a hint of yesterday's turkey warmed in the oven. Mom chatted in the kitchen, radio murmuring low. Dad hummed tunelessly. Sleep okay? Mom asked, handing me a mug. Yeah. I lied. My voice sounded hollow. On my way back to my room, I stopped dead in the doorway. Muddy footprints circled my bed. Not shoe prints. Bare feet. The toes were splayed. The heels smudged. Edges blurred as if whatever had left them didn't have firm bones inside. They were darker at the center, as if something thick had dripped from above. The trail didn't start or end at the door. It just began at the side of my bed, looped around it twice, then vanished halfway across the room. The sheets on my side were rumpled, but not how I'd left them. The covers were pulled down just enough to expose my throat. My parents laughed about something downstairs. The morning sunlight made the prints look almost fake, like someone had painted them as a joke. I knew better. Later, when I told Grandma about it on the phone, there was a long silence on the other end. I told you we don't waste what's given to us, she said at last. Her voice sounded older, tired. Something always comes to collect what's left behind. What was it? I asked. Last night. Another silence. I heard the faint hum of her fridge through the line. Next year, she said. Come early. There are some recipes you should finally learn. I stared at the fading prints on my bedroom floor. No matter how many times I cleaned, faint stains remained, ghost dark on the wood. I haven't decided yet if I'll go. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my parents are asleep, I hear a sound in the kitchen downstairs. The soft, reluctant pull of a fridge door opening, and the slow, wet footsteps of something that knows it's owed. I always thought the wishbone thing was stupid. It was one of those little family traditions that just stuck. Every Thanksgiving after the plates were cleared, My uncle would dig through the turkey carcass, elbow deep in greasy bones, until he yanked out the wishbone. Then he'd hold it up, grin, and say, "Who's feeling lucky?" Every year it was me and my cousin Ben. We were born 3 weeks apart, grew up more like siblings than cousins. When we were little, the wishbone showdown felt huge, like some magical duel the adults had passed down just for us. But by the time we were in our 20s, it was more habit than anything. An eye roll, a joke, a tug, and then we were done. This year, I almost forgot about it. I'd driven up from Boston the night before, white-knuckling my way through holiday traffic while the radio cycled through the same 5 songs. My parents moved 2 years ago, downsized to a smaller house in the same town, but somehow they still hosted Thanksgiving. The new place was too bright and too clean, all fresh paint and modern fixtures instead of the worn-in warmth of the old house. The kitchen smelled right, though. Turkey and sage and onions, pie cooling on the counter. The scent hit me as soon as I walked in that morning and settled under my skin like a sedative. By the time evening rolled around, I was bloated and half asleep on the couch. Football murmured on the TV, the glow flickering across my dad's face as he snored in his recliner. My mom and aunt clattered dishes in the kitchen. Someone's kid cried upstairs. The radiator hissed and clicked. Pillow hit me in the shoulder. I cracked an eye. Ben loomed over me, cheeks flushed, hair sticking up. "You ready?" "For what?" I mumbled. He held up his hand. The wishbone dangled from his fingers, pale and brittle, still slick in spots where it hadn't fully dried. "Oh God," I said. "We're still doing that?" "We always do it," my uncle called from the dining room. "Come on, Em. Don't break the streak." I hauled myself off the couch, joints protesting. "Fine, let's get it over with." We faced each other by the kitchen island. The overhead light buzzed faintly, throwing a harsh glow over the bone. Up close, it looked fragile, like one wrong move would turn it to dust. I took the thicker end, tradition, since I was older by 21 days. Ben took the other side. "You know the rules," he said, mock serious. "Close your eyes. Make a wish. Pull on 3. I closed my eyes, more out of muscle memory than belief. My fingers pinched the slick bone. I didn't think of anything. My mind was a static blur of turkey and exhaustion. 1, 2, 3. We pulled. There was the familiar little resistance, then a soft crack. One side snapped. Bone dust flaked under my thumbnail. Ben swore. "Damn it," he said. "You got it." Again. I opened my eyes. I was holding the longer piece. His side was a jagged nub. A small ripple of satisfaction ran through me, embarrassingly disproportionate to the stakes. "Guess the universe just likes me better," I said, smiling. He rolled his eyes. "What did you wish for?" "Like I'd tell you." I dropped my piece into the trash, on top of a pile of greasy paper towels and potato skins. It disappeared into the mess. The moment passed. Someone called us in to help with dessert. Ben wandered off to sneak a slice of pie. The wishbone, as far as I was concerned, was already forgotten. The weird stuff started small. I chalked the first thing up to coincidence. My phone had been on 2% battery for the last half hour, taunting me with that tiny red sliver. I plugged it into the outlet by the hallway. 10 minutes later, I checked it, expecting a grudging 5% or 6%. It said 82%. "Ha!" I muttered. The charger was my mom's, one of those off-brand ones that usually barely worked. Tonight, it was apparently channeling Thor. Then there was the parking ticket. I'd left my car on the street overnight, half on the curb, because my dad's garage was full of junk. In the morning, when I went out to grab something from the trunk, I saw the strip of yellow under my wiper, right up until a gust of wind peeled it off and sent it flying down the street. It stuck to the side of a passing truck and disappeared. Later, my dad told me the city cameras had been down all night. "Some system glitch," he said. "They're fixing it Monday." Good luck, I thought. That's all. Dumb luck. The first time I heard the whisper was that afternoon. I was in the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to get rid of the puffy, post-holiday bloat. The faucet dripped steadily, the sound echoing slightly in the small space. Light from the frosted window painted everything in flat gray. As I straightened, wiping my face with a towel, I heard it. A soft, breathy murmur, right behind my ear. "Congratulations." I jerked around so fast I nearly slipped. The towel fell to the floor. The bathroom was empty. The door was shut. The only sounds were the drip of the faucet and the distant hum of the fridge downstairs. My heart thudded against my ribs. Inside the cabinet mirror, my own reflection looked pale and startled, eyes too wide. "Get it together," I muttered. I blamed the lack of sleep, the sugar crash, whatever. That night, after my parents went to bed, I stayed up in the living room scrolling through my phone in the dark. The only light came from the screen, blue and cold, and the occasional passing car outside. The house settled around me, creaks and sighs. Every time I walked into a room that day, the lights had flickered. Just a little, just once, like they were adjusting to my presence. I hadn't noticed at first, but by midnight, I couldn't unnotice it. Even now, sitting in the dark, I watched the hallway light through the open doorway. It was off. The switch was up, though. I could see the little line of white plastic, like someone had turned it on and the bulb hadn't gotten the message. I lifted my hand and snapped my fingers once, an old habit from childhood when I pretended I had powers. The hallway light blinked on for a split second, then off again. I stared. My dad's voice floated faintly from the back of the house, thick with sleep. "You still up?" "Yeah," I called back, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Going to bed now." The whisper came again as I climbed the stairs. "Lucky girl." It slid along the side of my neck, words shaped by breath I couldn't feel. I spun around. The staircase behind me was empty, the lower hallway dark. My skin prickled. I climbed faster. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I half expected to feel someone leaning close, lips almost touching my ear. Shadows on the ceiling seemed to shift when I wasn't looking at them. At some point, I drifted off anyway, draped sideways across the bed. The dream, or whatever it was, wasn't like my usual ones. There were no scenes, no narrative, just a sense of weight, of being watched. I remember standing in a white space that wasn't really a space at all. It didn't have walls or a floor. It just was. In front of me, there was the faint outline of something. A shape, presence. Not quite visible, but dense enough that my eyes kept snagging on it. "Your wish was accepted," it said. The voice was the same whisper I'd been hearing all day, but clearer now, like I was inside its mouth. The words vibrated in my bones. "I didn't wish for anything," I said. My voice sounded small, tinny. A pause. If silence could be offended, this one was. "You won," it said. "You were chosen. A wish was owed. It was made. I didn't. Not by you," it said. "By something of you. It is enough." The white space pulsed. For a second, I thought I saw hands reaching toward me. Not human, all joints and too long bones, slick with something wet. I jolted awake, heart pounding, mouth dry. The room was dark. The glow from the streetlight outside cut a pale stripe across the ceiling. My phone on the nightstand lit up on its own. The screen was blank. No notification, just the lock screen. The battery icon flashed from 3% to 97% and back again in the space of a heartbeat. "Your wish was accepted." This time, the whisper wasn't in my head. It was right next to the bed. I went cold in an instant. Every hair on my body stood on end. I could feel breath against my cheek, cold and damp, not smelling like anything at all. The mattress dipped slightly near my feet, as if someone had just sat down. "I didn't make a wish," I said. I don't know how I got the words out. My teeth were chattering. Something shifted in the dark. My eyes strained, trying to adjust, trying to make sense of the deeper darkness near the foot of the bed. It was like looking at smoke. It moved wrong. "You held the bone," the voice said almost gently. "You broke it. You drew the longer piece. That is the bargain." "I threw it away," I whispered. "Yes," it said. "I found it." There was a sound then, a faint, delicate clicking like teeth tapping together, or bone on bone. Thanks will be collected, it said. Luck must balance. I lunged for the lamp, hand slapping the nightstand. The bulb flared on, harsh and yellow. The room was empty. The mattress was smooth. The air was still. My breath came in harsh, uneven pulls. Enough, I said out loud, more to myself than to whatever might be listening. I shoved my feet into slippers and grabbed my hoodie. The need to see the wishbone, stupid, broken bit of bone that it was, had become a spike in my brain. The house was quiet, the kind of deep quiet that only exists in the hour or two before dawn. The digital clock on the microwave downstairs read 3:12 a.m., its green numbers casting a faint glow on the counter. The trash can sat in the corner of the kitchen, lid closed. A small, normal thing. My hand shook when I lifted it. The smell hit first. Sour. Metallic. Underneath the expected hints of stale gravy and coffee grounds, there was something else. Something like blood that had just started to dry. I swallowed hard and started to dig. Paper towels, slick with congealed fat. Foil from pie dishes. Potato peels, cold and limp. The wet slap of leftovers against plastic. My fingers scraped the bottom of the bag. No wishbone. My heart stuttered. I pulled more carefully, fingers searching for the tiny, familiar Y-shape. Nothing. Just mush and scraps and a clump of something I didn't want to identify. That's impossible, I whispered. Then my knuckles hit something solid. Bigger. My hand closed around it before I thought to be cautious. It was long and hard and wrong. Not the little brittle curve I expected. I pulled it out. It was a bone. Not a wishbone. Not from a turkey. It was too long, too thick, ending in a rough, jagged split where it had been broken. The surface was pale in some places, stained dark rusty brown in others. Strands of something clung to it. Tissue, maybe, or tendon, stringy and torn. It was still wet. Blood, fresh enough to be tacky, smudged my fingers. A drop slid down the shaft and fell onto the tile with a sound that was absurdly loud in the quiet kitchen. My stomach heaved. I dropped the bone. It hit the floor with a hollow clack and rolled, stopping against the base of the cabinet. The broken end pointed toward me, accusing. Where did you get that? My mom's voice was a thin thread behind me. I spun. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, hair mussed, eyes half closed. For a second, I thought I could pretend. Say it was from the turkey, that I'd pulled it out of the trash and overreacted. Then I saw her face properly. She was pale, too pale. Shadows pooled under her eyes, not the soft smudges of a bad night's sleep, but deep, bruised hollows. Her lips were colorless. Her hands, clutching the doorframe, shook. Mom, I said. I heard something, she said, like chewing. In my dreams. Her gaze dropped to the bone on the floor. Oh God, is this some kind of joke? I asked, voice too high. Did you? No, her eyes flicked to mine. There was something behind the fear in them. Recognition. Resignation. What happened? I whispered. She exhaled. A shuddering breath. When I was your age, your grandfather did the wishbone thing with me, she said. I won. I got a scholarship I shouldn't have been able to afford. Met your father, never got sick, never crashed a car. Things just always worked out for me. And then I started finding things. In the trash. In the yard. On the porch. She closed her eyes. Bones. Teeth. Little gifts. I ignored them. I told myself it was coincidence. But every year, someone we knew had an accident. Lost a job. Got sick. Luck goes somewhere. I stared at her. At the bone between us. At the faint, shimmering trail of wet that led away from the trash can and across the floor. Like something had dragged itself halfway out and then back in. You never told me, I said. What would I have said? She snapped, then caught herself. Her shoulders sagged. I thought if we stopped making a big deal out of it, stopped believing in it, it would go away. I thought of the whispers, the way the lights bowed to me, the voice in the white space saying, a wish was owed. It knows I won, I said. She nodded, eyes bright with tears. It always knows. The fridge hummed behind us. The sound wavered, then steadied, almost like laughter. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Dawn came gray and thin. My dad shuffled in, oblivious, scratching his chest, complaining about the cold. I made coffee with shaking hands and cleaned the floor until the tile was spotless. We wrapped the bone in 3 layers of garbage bags and drove it to a dumpster 2 towns over. It felt pointless even as we did it, like throwing a message in a bottle into a river and hoping no one ever read it. I kept telling myself it was over, but since then, little things keep happening. An unexpected refund check. A close call in traffic where the other car somehow missed me by inches. A job offer I wasn't qualified for landing in my inbox. And at the edges of those moments, every time, the shadows in the room seemed to lean toward me. Light bulbs stutter, and a soft, breathy voice curls around my ear. Pleased. Congratulations, it says. We'll collect later. I don't know when later is. I don't know how much luck they think they owe me. I just know that something watched me snap a turkey bone in half and decided I belonged to it. And somewhere, just out of sight, something with long, splintered bones and wet hands is keeping an account.